Lisa from Been There, Got Out, and I have been waiting months for this guest. Her name is Dr. Rebecca Vazquez, and I actually had the wrong heading for her. I thought she was a neurobiologist, but she's actually a trauma therapist with a passion for neurobiology. So we actually met, we were both presenting at a domestic violence, there she is, conference in New Jersey, where she teaches at Rutgers. So impressed and thought, ooh, we need to do an interview. So I'm hoping we could get her on here. And I've got loads of questions for her. And some of her information is going to be really, really helpful because she's going to get into the neurobiology of trauma. And she has all kinds of tips of things you can do when you're being triggered or freaking out. And I don't know why she's not on here. Let me try it again. All right, let's see, Rebecca. All right, I just tried to get you on here one more time. If it doesn't work, then we'll go out and come back in again. Oh, it's working. Great. Yes. Okay, and I can see you. All right, so Rebecca, like, there's so much. I mean, my audience here is all dealing with all kinds of trauma. Most of them from legal abuse, from being stuck in the system with a really toxic ex, and then even the co-parenting, the trauma of those communications in the inbox. So it's something that doesn't really go away. And that's why I was so impressed with your presentation at the conference that we were at in New Jersey. Before you even introduce yourself officially, one thing that really stood out was what part of our bodies carries anxiety so much? That I was just like, I want you to start there because that was a surprise.
Sure. I mean, our whole bodies carry anxiety in many different ways, and I often say, learning about neurobiology for me is exciting, and I get to geek out about this stuff. But for a lot of people, it can be overwhelming. So if it is, just take a deep breath and track along with me. Everything that I'm saying is Googleable, researchable, and you can learn at your own pace as well. But just to give some context, I've been a trauma clinician for, I think, going on 18 years now, and have been working with survivors of mostly interpersonal violence, trafficking, domestic violence, sexual assault, things like that. And so in my experience, I wish they would have taught me this. I wish they would have taught me this earlier, how anxiety is not just an emotion, but it is a physiological response, that the more we learn about how our bodies and brains process stress and trauma, the more skillful we can be, the more compassionate we can be towards ourselves, and the more we can work smarter and not harder as it relates to how we cope with all of those big feelings. So anxiety exists everywhere in the body, and it is rooted in this thing called the vagus nerve. And so it's VAGUS, not like Las Vegas. And so the vagus nerve touches literally every major organ in our body. So our lungs, our heart, our vocal cords, our intestines, everything is touched by this one nerve. And the only job this nerve has is to prepare the body for the threat. And the anxiety is a threat of some sort, a threat that something could go wrong, a threat of our physical harm, a threat for our financial security, our emotional security. And so all of this is happening subconsciously, but we feel it. We feel it very much. And so anxiety can exist everywhere, but we tend to really feel it in our jaw, in our shoulders, and in our hands. And so I teach a technique called drop three, which is to literally just remind yourself to drop your jaw, like just let it hang, drop your shoulders, and also extend your stomach and your hands to the best of your ability as a physical cue to let your body know, like, yes, there's anxiety, but I'm okay in this moment.
Yeah. Wow. I was thinking particularly about the hands, especially in terms of having to sit in court and not knowing what to do with your hands. And you had some ideas of what to do with your hands.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's lots of things. I've supported lots of survivors in courts over the years. I used to be a legal advocate, and still do some legal advocacy. And one of the things that I always prep folks to do in court is to come prepared with some type of sensory thing that is subtle, but can be accessible for you. I've had people use a paper clip. I've had people use a piece of jewelry, like a bracelet or a ring. A pen, a stone, you know, anything really, anything that you can assign some type of meaning to, and that
Mhm.
feels for you. What I've also had people bring like a very small amount of Play-Doh, just to kind of fiddle with in their hands while they're testifying or while they're, going through a hearing of any sort. So anything that that sends a message to the brain using our five senses that we are in the present, that we're not in the past, that we're not in the future, but that we're right here is going to be really, really helpful to manage high anxiety in the moment. So, not just a sense of touch, but making sure you have maybe some mints, some water, some, beforehand, like what are you listening to? Like, really being mindful of how all of your five senses literally send a message to the brain like, okay, you're here in the present, let's stay in the present. And our senses are the best way to do that.
Yeah, yeah, and there's so many little things like Play-Doh, or I know one of our clients used, I think I told you this at the conference, she used to put a little bit of eucalyptus oil on her wrists because when she'd sniff it, it would remind her of her mother,
Yeah.
who was a comforting presence.
Mhm.
And I thought that's what a brilliant idea.
Oh yeah, and actually a fun fact, the sense of smell, our olfactory bulb, is the only sense that is directly connected and right next to our amygdala, which in our brain is the fear command center where anxiety is born in our brain. So it's also really highly linked with memory. So smell is highly correlated with memory. Either that can be a very triggering thing, or it can be a very soothing thing. And so I always have essential oils and stress toys and all kinds of things because when the senses are engaged, we are more likely to be present. And it helps to avoid and mitigate the spiral of anxiety that can often happen, especially in court.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we work on with our clients who are going to court or dealing with a custody evaluator is to have them be as calm as possible by staying focused and organized. And so when you are freaking out and emotional, you cannot think about anything, so you can't answer properly. So I love how what you're saying also helps people, like, if I can be calm, my brain can work better.
Yeah, I mean, easier said than done.
Right.
Easier said than done, especially in situations where so much is on the line, and so much of what's being represented in court may not be the fullness of your experience, and that may be a really frustrating thing to experience in real time. And so you know it's it's an ideal to work towards, but we are human after all, and if emotions do come out, then we try our best to cope with them as best as we can. Because it's a really, really hard thing to be able to go through any type of legal proceeding when there's been trauma and a lot of pain involved. So easier said than done, but we can work smarter, not harder, once we understand how our brains and bodies work.
Yeah. One of the things that also stood out to me was you had said something about how people are always being asked, like, what's wrong with you? And what should we be asking victims instead?
Yeah, I mean, how many times have we heard that question of like if someone is expressing an emotion, whether it's anger, sadness, whatever, and they're like, "What's wrong with you?"
Hmm.
Um, Question should be, "What happened to you?"
Yeah.
Um, Reason why people express what they do, um, the emotions that they do express. There's always a reason, but we tend to focus on the behavior and not what is the root of the behavior. And so a lot of times we stay stuck on, oh well, they yelled at me or they were short or whatever, but there's always a function to every behavior, whether you are the person who is being harmed or the person who is causing harm. There's a function to every behavior. And the more you understand that, the more compassion you can have towards yourself and others, and the more skillful you can be, especially in something like court, where, you know, there's so many powers that be that are hearing your story.
Yeah. One of the things that a lot of people in this situation feel, besides frustration, is
Yeah.
anger. And people often will say, I shouldn't be so angry. I know I have to calm down. But you said that anger is actually a good thing.
I love anger, and I haven't always. I used to actually pride myself on not being able to feel anger, on not being an angry person. But the more I've done my own work, the more I have realized that anger can actually be a gift. But we have been taught many times, you know, especially as women of color in particular, generationally, we see trends around anger and how it's normed and socialized. You know, generally not acceptable for us to express anger. And we often experience anger and equate it to harm. And so
Hmm.
if I'm angry, then I'm like the person who's causing harm to me, and I don't want to be that person. And so it's tricky to navigate, but over time and with support, and whether a therapist or a good friend or faith or whatever resources you have, my hope is that people can learn to embrace anger, but I have a few rules around it. And this is what I tell my clients all the time. Anger, I see it like a brick, like a physical brick. You can use that brick to build an orphanage, let's say, or you can use that brick to bust a window.
Mm,
The issue is the brick. It's what we do with the brick.
I
And
love that.
it's the same thing with our anger. Our anger is not the issue. It's what we do with it that can be problematic and harmful sometimes, whether to others or ourselves. So the rules that I always tell my clients and myself sometimes around anger is to give yourself full permission to feel it, but you're not allowed to harm yourself. You're not allowed to harm someone else, whether that's physically, emotionally, in any other way. And don't do anything illegal that will get you locked up. Other than that, you know, find ways to release it
Mhm.
and express it. It's a way, whether it's crying, whether it's working out. My favorite is cleaning. When I'm angry, my house cleans. And so, you know, like a visceral physical release to that emotion is often missing from our
Mm,
process because we're just so focused on I shouldn't feel that angry. When the reality is anger is an appropriate response to injustice.
right. Yeah, that's great. I wish my anger response was to clean because I could have a much neater house. All right. Another thing that you talked about was trauma, and you had said that it's something that happens much too fast, or too much too fast, or too little for too long.
Yeah,
Talk about that.
yeah. Yeah. You know, a lot of times our understanding of trauma can be limited to like these very big and obvious ways in which harm happens, right? So, physical violence, a natural disaster, a car accident, where all of those things are too much happening too fast, and it exceeds our brain's ability to cope in that moment because it's just overwhelming. And even though you may plan for it or whatever, like a let's say a natural disaster, there's still a part of it that exceeds our ability to cope because things can be so overwhelming. The other end to that, though, is when there's too little for too long. And that speaks to more of the neglect experience, where there's too little, maybe not only physical neglect of like food, water, shelter, safety, but also the emotional pieces of that. When there's too little love, when there's too little care and attention, when there's too little of those emotional needs for an extended period of time, that is also traumatic. And so trauma is not just the big obvious things, it can be the little things that are absent. Another metaphor to really sum that up is when you think about, you know, how water erodes rock over
Mhm.
time. You know, that it could either be you can move a mountain by exploding it or just by putting a little current of water over time, that rock will change. And it's the same with trauma.
Yeah, and as you're saying that, I'm thinking about how in our community in particular, people will minimize what's happened to them because they'll say, "Oh, well, that person didn't like really hit me,
Um,
so mine isn't as bad." I'm sure you see that too.
Very often. And one of the things that we often educate our folks on is that, you know, we're not the expert of people's experiences. We never are. But one thing that we always, you know, ask for people to reflect on, and that we hear so many times from survivors, is that the physical violence compared to the emotional violence, that the emotional violence is always harder to get through.
Hmm.
Side of it is lasts longer, than like a bruise that may heal. Not to say physical violence is okay at all. No violence is okay. But many people often experience a harder time healing from the emotional sides of it. And so if
Hmm.
you're like the power and control wheel, the vast majority of violence that we experience is not physical.
Right, right.
There's a-
Yeah, yeah. What is the window of tolerance?
Mm, all right, here's the neurobio stuff again. So remember I mentioned the vagus nerve at the beginning of the talk. So the vagus nerve either has, let's say, three settings. In setting, we are safe, we are grounded, we are that's where we experience joy and connection, that's where we feel our best. But when there is a threat of some sort, the vagus nerve can either go into hyper arousal, which is where we see a flight or a fight response, or it can go the opposite way into a hypoarousal, which is where we see the freeze response.
Hmm.
One can experience any and all of those responses. Some people experience one more than others, but generally speaking, we all have the capability to either go to fight or flight or to freeze and back again, right? Like our vagus nerve is always shifting based off of the information it's receiving from our environment. So the window of tolerance is to say that part of healing is to experience those really hard emotions, but to experience them within this window where we can increase our ability to feel our vagus nerve regulated.
Hmm.
So, for again, if our hyper is up here and our hypo arousal is down here, and that middle part is our happy, safe space, when we experience trauma, it's like a window that closes and we become more likely to experience the fight or flight or the freeze. So the window of tolerance is another way of saying, let's open up this window, and we stretch open that window by actually feeling our feelings, which is the sucky part, but in the central part to be able to increase our ability of our vagus nerve to feel safe. So when in therapy, we often talk about like pacing ourselves so that we're not intentionally triggering someone to go all the way up here or all the way down here where they're shutting down, but like just enough where you stretch open that window a little bit, where you can feel some feelings but still stay regulated.
Hmm.
And that's the hard part of therapy, and healing from trauma, is finding those ways to feel the emotions while still being grounded and being able to explore what that looks like for you.
Yeah. So let's say someone is freaking out. You had some other great tips in terms of de-escalating quickly to hopefully get back in that window.
Sure, yeah. I mean, senses are a big one. So, really being mindful of what your five senses are. And I often tell people to plan for that, whether they're in court, whether they're in therapy, a hard conversation, um, or, you know, sometimes triggers can come at unexpected times. And so I always encourage people to have like a sensory kit, a playlist on, you know, your where you listen to your music. Um, a playlist on YouTube of like funny videos or videos that make you cry or whatever. To be thoughtful and intentional around what access you have to the sensory things around you. So that's always my number one go to. My other go to is breath work. Vagus nerve, when the vagus nerve is activated, either fight or flight or freeze, it impacts our breath. So think about it. When we're anxious, when we're angry, our heartbeat is racing, our breathing becomes more shallow. We are unable to take deep breaths in really high survival moments. So our ability to take deep and controlled breaths is like the hack to our brain that says, wait a minute, if I can actually take deep breaths, I may actually be okay in this moment, even
Mhm.
though a lot is going on. Um, but if I were truly in a life, um, you know, threatening moment, I wouldn't be able to take those deep breaths. So the ability to breathe, you people say it all the time, take a deep breaths. I used to get mad when people used to tell me that. I
Mhm.
thought patronizing.
Yeah.
Um, or like, I don't want to breathe right now. I'm angry. I'm feeling what I'm feeling. But then I started understanding the science behind it and how effective it is. So much so that Navy SEALs and people within our armed forces are trained in breath work as a way to regulate their own vagus nerves. It works. I'm not saying it works to the point where you won't feel crappy, but it will help not to amplify the emotion, and it will help keep it more manageable. So we do breathing techniques like the box breathing technique, which is 4 seconds inhale, 4 seconds hold, 4 seconds exhale, 4 seconds hold.
Mhm.
And you repeat that a few times. And that intentional breathing eventually helps the vagus nerve to calm down. One other trick that I tell a lot of people is also the use of temperature. Temperature is another way to kind of help our brains receive the message that, wait a minute, I need to kind of reset. So, um, what that could look like. If you're feeling anxious, maybe stepping aside, going to the restroom, washing your hands in really hot water or cold water.
Mhm.
Place a cold compress on the back of your neck, or in particular on your sinuses.
Mhm.
Cold on the sinuses activates something that all mammals have called the mammalian dive reflex, which automatically helps to slow our heart rate. That's
Wow.
why you may see like people dunking their heads in ice water or something like that. That is to activate the mammalian dive reflex, which it makes it seem like we are diving underwater, and our heart rate automatically starts slowing down, which may help to regulate our breathing and our anxiety.
Wow. Wow, that's fascinating. I'm thinking about this trend with ice baths, but to me, I'm like, that's helpful too?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. There's tons of research around that. Um, you know, do, do you? If ice baths ain't for you, that's completely fine. You don't have to do that. But to play around with that temperature, sometimes like now in the Northeast, it's pretty cold. And
Mhm.
blasts of cold air can just reset us. And temperature can be a really important part of how we cope. When we are anxious, check this out. When we are anxious, some people describe feeling tingling in their fingers and their toes. That's our because of the vagus nerve, our blood is being rerouted from our extremities to the core part of our body as a protective feature. So
Wow.
if we were, let's say, to get we're chased by a tiger in the woods or something, and we get scratched, we're not going to bleed out, and our core organs are protected. That's what causes our blood, our heart rate to beat faster, our breathing to become more erratic. It's all this subconscious mechanism, all rooted to protect us. But when we're having an anxiety attack, it does not feel like that. So, another technique, again, is to wash your hands or expose your hands or extremities to cold or heat. Please don't hurt yourselves. But that shock of the temperature tells the brain, oh, wait, I need to send blood back to that area. And that can be a helpful way to slow down the anxiety.
That is fascinating. Wow.
Yeah.
Um, so speaking of that, you talked about something called bilateral stimulation,
Yeah.
which I also had never heard of before. And you said there's ways to do it, and there's also things to listen to. What's that?
Yeah. I love geeking out about this stuff. I wish we were all taught this as, a standard part of our education system,
Mhm.
we all engage in bilateral stimulation. Basically, that is any left right stimulation of the brain. So, for example, when we are in deep sleep, one stage of deep sleep is called REM, rapid eye movement. And that's when our eyes, as we're sleeping, move back and forth, left and right. Um, and that is part of how our brains and our nervous systems reset. That is part of the rebooting process when we sleep. That's why kids need so much sleep,
Mm.
because literally helping their bodies to grow and to heal and develop. So, Dr. Francine Shapiro many years ago had the question, what if we do that when we're awake? What would it have an impact on our nervous system? And she found that yes, it would. So there are counting modalities, therapeutic modalities like EMDR that are rooted in bilateral stimulation, whether moving your eyes, tapping, anything like that, anything left, right, as a way to process things that are stuck in the subconscious parts of our brain. But you don't need to go to a therapist to do bilateral stimulation. Going for a walk, going for a run, certain exercise, dance movements, musical instruments, all of those left, right activities, crocheting,
Mhm.
that's left, right, and rhythmic is helping our brains process things that are not automatically conscious, but that are kind of stuck in our nervous system. An example of that is I'm not a runner, but people who often run tell me that they experience this runner's high, or that running is therapy, or it helps clear their mind. It's bilateral. We don't even,
I run. I don't get a runner's high, but I run just to stay in shape. But
yeah,
yeah, I do think more clearly when I'm running,
yeah.
and I
No,
think it's because maybe it is because of the back and forth. And you said there's also some playlists with music that you can find.
yeah, I mean, on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, I'm sure, if you look up bilateral sounds or bilateral playlists, it will, curate the sound to activate that left-right um, bilateral sound, which can be helpful for folks. And so I think a lot of my approach to coping with trauma symptoms is just being open and trial and error. For some
Mhm.
people it might be, you know, the best thing. For some people it might not work, and that's okay. It's just staying open to figuring out what works for you.
Yeah. Yeah. So, just last before you go, because I know we're almost out of time, is you talked about how voice can be really powerful and it's important to say things out loud.
Yeah,
Tell us about that.
yeah, yeah. That's a whole episode in and of itself. But one of the things that I've seen and have heard from survivors over the years is the feeling of not being seen or heard, in addition to not feeling safe, and having their voice taken away from them as a part of the power that's being taken away from them.
Mhm.
Um, so we see that come to a head in things like legal proceedings, but we also see that in more of the clinical healing spaces around how powerful it is to be for you, for each individual, to be able to say your own story in its fullness. We feel it, we know it, we've lived it, but to be able to take it from, Tarana Burke said this, the founder of the Me Too movement, to be able to take it from the pit of your belly, to bring it up and actually say it, whether it's to yourself, a therapist, whoever, that is huge, because our voice is an extension of our power,
Mhm.
and we use our voice for healing. um, it involves saying the hard things, and so we can also use our voice in terms of activism, whether we're advocating for ourselves in the legal system, whether we're protesting or rallying or whatever we're doing. Our voice is a key component of how we express our power, and just like with any tool, we have to learn it. We have to learn our voice. We have to learn, how it's most effective for us and how it's most authentic for us. But a voice is a huge part of how we heal, and how we connect. And so, yeah, it's a pretty big and deep concept in my experience in helping folks heal.
Yeah. So you got a quick question. Would you recommend writing a book about our experiences? I think about doing this as writing helps me to express myself.
Yeah, why not? And guess what? Reading and writing can be bilateral. You're reading
Really?
from left to right, and then we go back,
Oh, yeah.
right? And so even the act of writing, that's part of the reason why reading and writing can be so freeing and therapeutic for some. Um, because there's bilateral stimulation in there too. So if you feel on your heart to express your story through the written word, that's still also using your voice.
That's amazing. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much, Rebecca. How can people find you if you want to be found? I know you're probably busy.
Private practice, but I'm not taking clients right now.
Uh-huh.
But I am open to speaking engagements and sharing, having these conversations and helping people to learn how to work smarter and not harder as it relates to healing from trauma and learning our brains and our bodies. So in that regard, you can follow me here. And then my website is also Sana. So my private practice is Sana Counseling and Consulting. And so I'm based in New Jersey. If you ever want a workshop or a presentation, I'm happy to oblige. And then hopefully in the near future, I'll open up for more clients, but that's the best way to find me.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much. You're getting greetings from Poland, and thank you for this amazing live.
Well,
But yeah, this is going all over the world. But thank you so much, Rebecca. I really appreciate this. I was really looking forward to it, and I'm thrilled that I was able to get you finally.
yes, it finally happened. Thank you for the invitation. I really appreciate it.
All right,
Best of
let's
luck
stay
there.
in touch.
Okay.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
bye.